Hey, before we jump into today's story, be sure you never miss another episode of 10-Minute Murder. To do that, all you have to do is follow the podcast on whatever app you're listening right now. It might say subscribe, follow, or collect, something like that. It depends on where you're listening. But hit that button and be a part of everything we're doing here.
10-Minute Murder contains depictions of actual crimes. What you are about to hear is real and violent in nature. Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to the brief and bingeable true crime podcast, 10-Minute Murder. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you for being here. And thanks to everyone that checked on me from the last episode. I did that episode while we were under severe weather warnings with heavy rain and thunder, which it turns out you couldn't hear at all through my microphone. I felt like in the moment it was really loud and it would add to the spookiness and the ambiance of the whole thing, but you couldn't hear it at all. But I'm 100% okay, and I appreciate your concern. Now, as I mentioned before, I think it's important that I keep these episodes to as close to 10 minutes as I can. That's why the show is called 10-Minute Murder. Now, on occasion, I can get the interesting and important information in just under 10 minutes. And on the rare occasion that happens, I don't add filler to it like I would with a college essay with the page minimum. I just let it be what it is. Most of the time, though, I go over just a little bit, and that's okay too. Even more rare, I throw the made-up rules completely away and do a much longer episode. If I feel like there's more that I want to let you know, or the story is just too interesting to cram into a 10-minute long bag, I'll go longer. And surprise, this is one of those episodes. A listener named Gina sent me a message on Instagram and asked if I'd ever considered doing an episode on Gary Ridgway. And I have, but there's just so much to tell about the Green River Killer, it would have to be a longer episode. In case you don't know who he is, Gary Ridgway is a serial killer that mostly targeted sex workers or other women he felt were vulnerable, including girls that ran away from home. His first 5 victims were dumped into the Green River, which is where the media gave him his nickname. He was morally and sexually depraved. He had fantasies about having sex with his mother and killing her. He would later return to where he dumped some of the women he killed and had sex with their dead bodies. Today, you're going to hear me describe how he grew up, his adult life, the murders he committed, and what happened after. Some of it you'll hear directly from his own mouth. This is Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer.
On a scale of killers from 1 to 10, do you think you're one of the best of all time?
I rate myself as probably number 1.
So that's pretty damn good, isn't it?
That's pretty good, yeah.
Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, the second of Mary and Thomas Ridgway's 3 sons. His home life was pretty troubled, as with the majority of future serial killers you hear about. Relatives have described his mother as domineering and have said that, while young, he witnessed violent arguments between his parents. His father was a school bus driver who would often openly complain about the presence of sex workers. He didn't like prostitutes, which is fine if you don't like them, but he would talk about it pretty often, which is a little more than weird. It feels like it might have been bordering on obsession. Ridgway had a bedwetting problem until he was 13, and his mother would wash his privates after every time he'd pee the bed. He would later tell defense psychologists that as an adolescent, he had conflicting feelings of anger and sexual attraction toward his mother, and also fantasized about killing her. Ridgway is dyslexic and also has a low IQ, in the low 80s. He was held back a year in high school. When he was 16, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy who survived the attack. Ridgway had led the boy into the woods and then stabbed him through the ribs and into his liver.
I didn't really think I had an urge to kill her. I just wanted her to stop. And
What did you want to do to her?
what did I want to do with her? Just to have her stop and
But how would you
Again.
do it? What did you think in your head about how you would do it? That's what we're trying to get at. When did you first think about treating your mom violently to get what you wanted her to do?
probably in fourth grade.
Okay, there we go. Fourth.
Fourth, fifth, and sixth was probably up to that grade.
And
And-
what was in your mind that you wanted to do to get her to treat you a certain way? What did you want to do to your mom here?
I wanted her to stop being angry at me for not knowing how to.
But she wasn't stopping,
No, she wasn't stopping.
was she?
No.
She kept picking at you, belittling you, embarrassing you. I mean, that was pretty clear from yesterday.
It happened in school too, so I had.
So what was your way of retaliating against her in your mind? What were you thinking to do to your mom?
I don't know if I was thinking of hurting her. I just wanted her to stop and let me alone. Angry at her for pushing and pushing and pushing on me to remember, and I just couldn't remember, and I just wanted her to stop.
But she didn't.
But she didn't know.
She didn't stop. So somewhere in the fourth or fifth grade, that sense of helplessness that you had not being able to get her to stop would very likely have produced thoughts of taking back some power and control over your mom to get the bitch to shut up. I mean, I'm sorry, but Gary, that's what we hear. And that's what one of the things we're looking to get a better understanding of.
During that thing, I usually took it out on other things instead of hurting her.
Living things?
Living things, killing animals.
Okay.
Killing animals. I stabbed a kid one time.
Okay.
Stabbed a kid with a knife.
Tell me about that.
It was down by Chinook, where I used to go to school. And boy was playing. I stabbed him in the side and didn't kill him. And I think it must have been about sixth grade, or I think it was seventh grade. And that was at the same time I was breaking out windows, throwing rocks at windows at school.
Not interested in that.
But that's what I took my aggression on. I couldn't take it on my mom. I had to take it on my animals and
How many
and your
animals
kids.
did you kill?
I killed a lot of birds, but one cat suffocated in an ice chest, and shot babies at dogs to hurt them, and threw rocks at my brother about that time. I think I was getting out of that though.
You couldn't take your aggressions out on your mom.
No, I couldn't.
But you could think about it.
I could think about it, and
What'd you think?
I thought about hurting her, so she'd shut up and leave me alone, and then
How did you think about hurting your mom?
killing her.
And how would you do that?
I thought with my hands, or I didn't have no guns or anything, so I didn't. It had to have been hands or.
And then after she was dead, what were you going to do in your head?
In my head, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just wanted her to stop. One time they were going to put me in a special school. I didn't want that. My dad and my mom were arguing about it all the time. And it was for retarded people, and I wasn't retarded, I don't think. So I was mad at them for wanting to put me away from other kids. And wanting to hurt her. And hurt her bad.
What does that mean? Hurt her bad. Help me to understand that. Okay, so walk me through what you were going to do with the knife in your head to your mother.
Cut her throat, so she wouldn't degrading me and putting me in. I couldn't remember things, and that was the only way I could think of hurting her to get her to stop.
When did you think about having sex with your mother?
14 or 15, I think.
Tell me about that. It's about the same time frame.
Mm-hmm. I'd see her out sunbathing, and I feel that she'd be good to have sex with, but she's my mother, and I never really. She's the only woman in my life, other than neighborhood girls, but so I'd get fantasies of having sex with her and wanting to, but being restricted on that part.
Explain to me fantasies and restricted on that part. Your
Well,
words.
because if she's my mother, it's not right for having sex with your mother, and she was always in two pieces, and she'd come off work, she'd go in the backyard, so it was inviting to fantasize with her, because she was there sunbathing and tan, and it was a something that really intrigued me. It's all women like this. They're different, and it roused me to. I get a hard on sometimes, and it was the only time I had an opposite sex. In class, everybody's clothed and stuff like that. This was a woman that was sometimes, laying down with no bra on. I mean, you couldn't see anything but bare skin, and it was a turn on in a way, and I enjoyed looking out the window at her when she wasn't watching.
Did your mom enjoy that?
She didn't even know I was there. No, she was down just sunbathing, and then she'd turn over, and before she turned over, she always fastened her bra and turned over, and maybe a little bit up here to show, because she no tan marks. Just a fantasy of wanting to have sex, touch her, feel her body, have her show me how to have sex. Because mothers teach you a lot of things, It's just a fantasy. It's something she wouldn't do it, but it's.
In your fantasy, what would your mom have you do to her?
Have me do to her. My fantasy would be to explore, to find different things what a woman has, girls have that guys don't have. Show me how to have sex, good sex.
And listen carefully to this.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time in your life, you also hate your mom for what she's doing to you.
Yes.
So how are those thoughts and fantasies colliding together?
And colliding together in my head when she was just laying down there, she was more of a sex object than a mother, and more of the fantasies of having sex with her and nothing to have to kill her. Two different things. When Dr. Jekyll Hyde, when she's down there, she's a sex fantasy, sex object. When she's up there trying to get me to read, and she's the other side of something I hated. I loved the part of her being a sex object, but I didn't like the part of her being the mother and working with me is trying to help me in reading, and I liked the sex part better than I liked the mother that was always trying to hurt, belittle me.
Ridgway graduated from high school in 1969 at the age of 20 and married his 19-year-old high school girlfriend, Claudia. He joined the United States Navy and was sent to Vietnam, where he served on board a supply ship and saw combat. During his time in the military, Ridgway frequently had sex with sex workers and contracted gonorrhea. Being given gonorrhea by a prostitute made him angry, really angry, but not angry enough to stop sleeping with prostitutes unprotected. His marriage to Claudia ended within a year. When questioned about Ridgway years later after his arrest, friends and family described him as friendly but strange, which I think describes most of us. His first two marriages resulted in divorce because of infidelities on both partners. His second wife, Marcia Winslow, claimed that he had placed her in a chokehold. He had become religious during his second marriage, going door to door. He was reading the Bible out loud at work and at home and insisting that his wife follow the strict teachings of their pastor. Ridgway would also frequently cry after sermons or after reading the Bible. Despite his beliefs, Ridgway continued to solicit the services of sex workers and wanted his wife to participate in sex in public and inappropriate places, sometimes even in areas where his victims' bodies were later discovered. According to many of the women in his life, Ridgway had an insatiable sexual appetite. His 3 ex-wives and several ex-girlfriends reported that he demanded sex from them several times a day. Often, he would want to have sex in a public area or in the woods. Ridgway himself admitted to having a fixation with sex workers, which at this point seemed kind of obvious. But he had a love-hate relationship with them. He frequently complained about their presence in his neighborhood, but he also took advantage of their services regularly. In my neighborhood, we don't have sex workers, but we do have an ice cream man. And I complain about how loud his music is and how he's trying to give me diabetes. But do I still take advantage of the ice cream man's services? Absolutely. Some have speculated that Ridgway was torn between his lusts and his staunch religious beliefs. With his second wife, Marcia, Ridgway had a son, Matthew. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Ridgway is believed to have murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women near Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. In court statements, Ridgway later reported that he killed so many that he lost count. A majority of the murders occurred between 1982 and 84. The victims were believed to be either sex workers or runaways, whom he picked up along the Pacific Highway South. Ridgway sometimes showed the women a picture of his son to trick them into trusting him. They would engage in sexual activity, and after minutes of intercourse from behind, Ridgway would wrap his forearm around the front of their necks and use the other arm to pull back as tightly as he could, strangling them. He killed most victims in his home, his truck, or a secluded area. Most of their bodies were dumped at wooded areas along the Green River, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, and other dump sites within South King County. There were also 2 confirmed and another 2 suspected victims found in the Portland, Oregon area. The bodies were often left in clusters, sometimes posed, usually nude. He would sometimes return to the victims' bodies and have sex with them. Ridgway later explained that he did not find necrophilia more sexually satisfying, but having sex with the dead reduced his need to kill again and risk being caught. Because most of the bodies were not discovered until only the skeletons remained, 2 victims are still unidentified. Ridgway occasionally contaminated the dump sites with gum, cigarettes, and written materials belonging to others, and even transported a few victims' remains across the state lines into Oregon to confuse the police.
You went to a lot of work to create these ruses, and it sounds to me like you had a series of ruses that you had kind of in your hip pocket that you would bring out and you would use to make you appear normal to some of these women. And there had to be a way of you deciding, even though it was just like which ruse would work with which woman. I mean, you had to have a way of feeling them out and saying, I think ruse number 1, 2, 3 will work with this woman. Explain that process to me.
One of them was, woman would get in the car.
She's already in the car?
She's in the car. Let's say she's already in the car. We're driving down the road, and she wants to see my ID. So I whip out my ID, and with my ID would be I'd put my finger over my driver's license to hide my name. But on the opposite side was pictures. And a picture of my son. And they would see my son, and they would know I was probably a normal person.
But you were really using your son as part of your ruse.
Because at the time I didn't want to picture my ex-wife there, so I had to have a picture of my son.
Sure, you had to make it sound good.
I had a driver's license on one side, my ID, and then when I showed and then the next picture was my son. So that was in the vehicle. I had always had some, not always, but had some of my son's stuff in it, that he left in there, or some Star Wars or something like that, so it was like a family setting.
In your vehicle?
Yeah, so every time I opened up my wallet, there would be a picture of my son on one side, behind my ID. Here's my ID. I hide my name, flip it over, and there's my ID and my son's picture on the back side, and they'd see that, and that would lower any big defenses. And kids' toys, 8-year-old toys on the dash.
The only thing that would be better than that would be to have your son in the car with you. That would be a incredible ruse.
That happened once.
What happened?
It was July 18th, I think it was my brother's birthday. That weekend I picked up a woman on back highway, and Matthew was next to me in the seat, and she hopped in, and I took her over into an area, and my son was there, and I killed her. I'm real sure my son didn't see it, but that only happened one time.
But that was a pretty good ruse. So why didn't you do it again?
Well, for one thing, I didn't want my son to see that happen again, because I was killing a lot of them. And another thing, it never came to the opportunity again to do it. I had him in my truck. One time he was sleeping, and I picked up another prostitute, but I didn't date her.
From the early 1980s, the King County Sheriff's Office formed the Green River Task Force to investigate the murders. Task Force members included Robert Keppel and Dave Reichert, who periodically interviewed incarcerated serial killer Ted Bundy in 1984. Bundy offered his opinions on the psychology, motivations, and behavior of the Green River Killer. Almost like a real-life Hannibal Lecter, he suggested that the killer was revisiting the dump sites to have sex with his victims, which turned out to be true. And if police found a fresh grave, they should stake it out and wait for him to come back. Also contributing to the investigation was John Douglas, who developed a profile of the suspect. Ridgway was arrested in 1982 and in 2001 on charges related to prostitution. He became a suspect in the Green River killings in 1983. In 1984, Ridgway passed a polygraph test. Let me repeat that. A killer of 71 women and a very low IQ passed a polygraph test. On April 7, 1987, police took hair and saliva samples from Ridgway. Around 1985, Ridgway began dating Judith Mawson, who became his third wife in 1988. Mawson claimed in a 2010 television interview that when she moved into his house while they were dating, he had no carpet. Detectives later told her that he had probably wrapped a body in the carpet. In the same interview, she described how he would leave for work early in the mornings and some days, saying it was for the overtime pay. And Mawson speculated that he must have committed some of the murders while supposedly working these early morning shifts. She claimed that she had not suspected Ridgway's crimes before she was contacted by authorities in 1987 and had not even heard of the Green River Killer before that time because she didn't watch the news. Author Penny Moorhead interviewed Ridgway in prison, and he said while he was in the relationship with Mawson, his kill rate went down drastically and that he truly loved her. Of his 49 known victims, only 3 were killed while he was married to Mawson. She told a local television reporter, "I feel I have saved lives by being his wife and making him happy." The samples collected in 1987 were later subjected to DNA profiling, providing the evidence for his arrest warrant. On November 30th, 2001, Ridgway was at the Kenworth truck factory where he worked as a spray painter when police arrived to arrest him. Ridgway was arrested on suspicion of murdering 4 women nearly 20 years earlier, after first being identified as a potential suspect when DNA evidence conclusively linked semen in the victims to the saliva to the swab taken by police. The 4 victims named in the original indictment were Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Ann Christensen. 3 more victims, Wendy Cofield, Deborah Bonner, and Deborah Estes, were added to the indictment after a forensic scientist identified microscopic spray paint spheres as the specific brand and composition of paint used at the Kenworth factory during the specific time frame when these victims were killed. In early August 2003, Seattle Television News reported that Ridgway had been moved from a maximum security cell at King County Jail to an Airway Heights minimum medium security level tank. Other news reports stated that his lawyers, led by Anthony Savage, were close to a plea bargain that would spare him the death penalty in return for his confession to a number of the Green River murders. On November 5, 2003, Ridgway entered a guilty plea to 48 charges of aggravated first-degree murder as part of a plea bargain agreed to in June that would spare him execution in exchange for his cooperation in locating the remains of his victims and providing other details. In his statement accompanying his guilty plea, Ridgway explained that he killed all of his victims inside King County, Washington, and that he had transported and dumped the remains of the 2 women near Portland to confuse the police. On December 18, 2003, King County Superior Court Judge Richard Jones sentenced Ridgway to 48 life sentences with no possibility of parole and 1 life sentence to be served consecutively. He was also sentenced to an additional 10 years for tampering with evidence for each of the 48 victims, adding 480 years to his 48 life sentences. Ridgway led prosecutors to 3 bodies in 2003. On August 16th of that year, the remains of a 16-year-old girl found in Washington, 40 feet from State Route 410, belonged to Pammy Annette Avent, who had been believed to be a victim of the Green River Killer. The remains of Marie Malvar and April Bruntram were found in September 2003. On November 23, 2005, the Associated Press reported that a weekend hiker found the skull of one of the 48 women Ridgway admitted murdering in his 2003 plea with King County prosecutors. The skull of another victim, Tracy Winston, who was 19 when she disappeared from Northgate Mall on September 12, 1983, was found on November 20th, 2005 by a man hiking in a wooded area near Highway 18 southeast of Seattle. Ridgway confessed to more confirmed murders than any other American serial killer. Over a period of 5 months of police and prosecutor interviews, he confessed to 48 murders. 42 of those were on the police's list of probable Green River victims. In his confession, he acknowledged that he targeted prostitutes because they were easy to pick up and that he had hated most of them. He confessed that he had sex with his victims' bodies after he murdered them, but claimed he began burying the later victims so that he could resist the urge to commit necrophilia. Gary Ridgway later said that murdering young women was his career. That's today's 10-minute murder, extended edition, or whatever you want to call it. Thanks for listening today. A reminder that if you want to be sure not to miss an episode of this podcast, and to be sure that you get the episodes the moment I release them, follow 10-Minute Murder where you're listening right now. Sometimes the button says subscribe, follow, collect, or anything like that. Just press it. You can also connect with the podcast on social media, like Gina did, who suggested this story on Instagram. Thanks for listening to 10-Minute Murder. Have a good night.